All right, Elena, it is 3:15, shall we?
Yep.
All right, let's do it. So thank you to everyone who was able to come today. It is an honor to be here with Elena Kamenetsky, Japanese teacher from Louisville, Kentucky of Eastern High School and the 2020 ACTFL Teacher of the Year. My name is Grant Castor. I am Extempore's community manager and a Chinese teacher here in Minnesota. And this, Backward Design for Better Assessments, is a collaboration between Extempore and CSCTFL, Essential States on Teaching Foreign Languages. Elena, hello.
Hi, my name is Elena Kamenetsky. I am the Japanese teacher at Eastern High School in Louisville, Kentucky. And I am, I guess, the ACTFL 2020 Teacher of the Year. Actually, 2021, right? Shoot. All right.
Oh, well, no worries.
One of those.
One of those.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it should be 2021.
Oh, well.
Yeah, but I grew up in Iowa and I started my teaching career in Minnesota. So I'm very proud to be here representing Central States again and to be working with Grant to bring you this webinar.
All right, let's get into it. So I'm going to give, or Elena's going to give some background. What am I doing?
Yeah, so we only have an hour together today, but we're going to try to get through quite a lot. We're going to do an introduction to backwards design, look at some literature, some scientific research that backs up this methodology. So, you know, we're not just making it up. And we're going to give examples of what it looks like in an everyday classroom. We are going to plan using backwards design, some activities for our classrooms. And we are going to show you how to create backwards design based tasks on the Extempore web platform. So our objectives today: 1, participants will understand the underlying principles of backwards design and their application in the language classroom. 2, participants will use backwards design to create proficiency-based units and assessments. And 3, participants will reflect on the value of using backwards design and its role in lessening instructor burden, this is a big one, and easing the assessment creation process. All right, Grant.
So before we get started, we're just going to do a very brief poll on how familiar everybody is with backwards design. So in a quick second, you should see a poll pop up on Zoom. You are welcome to vote, or I don't say vote, choose your option. How familiar are you with backwards design? It's still fairly new to me. I'm relatively familiar, but not too sure how to use it in my classroom. I've started using it in my classroom with some success. Or finally, I've used backward design for a while now and feel quite comfortable. Elena, can you see the results?
I cannot see the results.
They will pop up just shortly. You got a pretty good mix.
All right.
I'm going to end the poll and we'll share the results. There you go.
Oh yeah, that's a really good mix.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So stop sharing. There we go. Onward. So just a little bit of background on backward design. What is backwards design? Just a little bit of a refresher. Many of you may know Grant Wiggins and Jay McTee. They wrote a pretty monumental book on understanding by design, which is the foundation of backwards design. And they say that the focus is on what students will be able to do with the content they learn and how instruction can facilitate teaching that content to meet stated objectives. It's about having our end goal in mind, and then what are we going to do to take our students to that end goal? Having our students do something with the content they are learning. And then for us, Jack Richards, the second quote, he is a very well-known ESL instructor, and he writes about this quite a bit. Since student learning is assessed on the basis of performance and the ability to demonstrate mastery of pre-specified skills and behaviors, teaching is generally based on helping learners acquire the communicative skills needed for specific situations, tasks, and activities. And those situations, tasks, and activities, that's exactly what we're going to look at today with many of the examples that Elena provides, and getting students there. How do we get them there? How do we get them to be able to complete a task, to be able to function properly in a given situation? Backwards design is taking that end goal and mapping everything out that gets them to that end goal. Next slide, Elena. So then finally, why backwards design? Two quotes. The Vanderbilt University Center for Teaching and Learning has a lot of really valuable resources on this. I pulled two direct quotes. I'm going to read them because I think it's just a little more powerful that way. Backward design is beneficial to instructors because it innately encourages intentionality during the design process. It continually encourages the instructor to establish a purpose of doing something before implementing it into the curriculum. You have to know, why am I doing this in my class? What is the purpose of it? What is its role in getting my students to that end goal? As opposed to maybe just seeing something in another classroom and say, oh, hey, I want to do that, but I don't know why I want to use it in my class. And then finally, for us teachers, once the learning goals or desired results have been identified, instructors, that's us, will have an easier time developing assessments and instructions around grounded learning outcomes. This helps us better understand where we are going with our classes and having a goal in mind every single day, no matter what step we are on that path of backward design. Next slide, Elena. Thank you. And then I think many of us might be familiar with the backward design flowchart. So this is in a very, very simple format. We first identify the desired results. Where do we want our students to be? For Elena, in our presentation today, that's going to be, she wants them to function at a restaurant. Many different things that they do, but that's the main idea. That's the big idea. Two is determining the acceptable evidence. What are our students going to do that shows they can complete that task, that they can accomplish that goal? And then finally, what learning experiences and instruction, what can we do in the class? What can we do to take our students to that goal? What will get them there? So that is backwards design in a very simple 1, 2, 3 step list. But of course, what does this look like in the language classroom, Elena? So we have to know, as I mentioned before, you start with the goal in mind. What do we want our students to do? It could be a variety of different tasks, like, as we'll see today, dining at a restaurant, inviting a friend out for the weekend, or hosting friends at home, right? So we have the tasks, we have these end goals. It could be hundreds of other different things, but you get the idea. And then finally, but next though, we have to get into the middle. What do we want our students to know? What do they need to know in order to do these things in that left column? These include language skills like vocabulary, grammar, usage of certain words. Languages have a lot of different, usage problems sometimes, and we have to be able to teach that. Our students have to know the restaurant vocabulary. They have to know, certain situations and the grammar that they'll have to use to accomplish that, to use it. And then obviously, on the other hand, cultural skills, right? As Elena will demonstrate to us today, there are dozens of cultural nuances that, as say an American going to a Japanese restaurant in Japan, we might totally embarrass ourselves because we have no idea what we're doing. So these things have to be taught. Examples like etiquette, certain customs, and obviously values. How do they view what they are doing, whether it's in entertainment, food, what have you. So we have the activities, we have the things that we need to teach, but then we also need, next step, how do we assess these skills? How do we get our students to tell us, okay, hey, I can do this, Mr. Kastner, I can use this properly in class. So there's 3 things we would have to assess, and they are, we're assessing their output. What are the students going to do to showcase their knowledge? How are they going to show it? How will they use the language? Again, Elena will have many relevant and proper examples for us today. We will assess, obviously, output, but also inputs. What are they going to interpret? What authentic resources can we give them to say, hey, I know what this means. I can understand this and I can interpret it. And then finally, just like in that middle column, we need to assess culture as well. And I think that can be a little difficult, but you'll see in the examples that Elena provides, there are many, sort of idiosyncrasies and nuances of culture that we can bring into situations to have our students show us, okay, do they get this or do they not? On the other hand, we also have to consider what backwards design is not. It is not starting with a vocabulary list without a goal in mind. And as you can tell, it is not grammatical focused as well. The entire focus of it is not grammar. It's that end goal. It's the real world task. And I like these memes. One simply cannot learn without real world application. telling us that's what we need. And then the funny one on the right. So then I said, haha, you'll use this in the real world. Right. So we have to, and why do I put these on there here though? We have to consider how we teach and how our assessments will influence our students' perspective on the class. We want them to enjoy language. Well, we need to show them how they can use it in the real world. If we're constantly only teaching vocabulary and grammar, that's probably going to negatively affect how our students view our class. Mm-hmm. So that is Backwards Design 101. Elena is chomping at the bit to speak, and I will hand it over to her.
Okay. So now I'm going to give you all an example of how I do this in my classroom. And really, I'm going to talk you through a process that I started this summer. I picked, this slide. So when I decide I'm going to tackle a unit, and I'm like, I want to design this unit. First, I start with, what do I want my students to be able to do? Those become my learning targets. How do I know if my students can do those things? That's how I design my assessments. And then what knowledge or skills will our students need to complete those assessments? So that's where the vocabulary and the grammar comes in as a means to an end to prepare them for that real world task that becomes like my assessment. So this summer, I decided to wrangle with something that I think every language teacher has at some point, the restaurant unit, because I have never been totally happy with how I do my restaurant unit. And I think I've revised it like 2 or 3 times already, but I'm like, I'm going to try it again. So starting from scratch, I was thinking to myself, what are the most likely real world scenarios for my students? Like how are they going to have to use the language? Okay, 2 scenarios immediately come to mind. One is hosting Japanese friends at a restaurant in America. And that is something that a lot of my students have experienced or will experience because we have exchange students. And also a lot of my students happen to have connections to Japan. I have a lot of students who have relatives who speak Japanese, who have relatives who have lived in Japan because they lived on military bases or whatever. So it's not a totally foreign concept that they might host a Japanese person at an American restaurant. And that comes with a whole set of skills, like being able to explain things in Japanese, which is something that over the years, I have learned that I need to be very intentional about adding to my classroom, because so many times I have run into situations where my students are trying to say something to a Japanese person in Japanese and they can't explain the thing they're talking about. Like this year, we were doing a virtual exchange with Japanese students on Schoology. We were actually doing the Global Classmates program with Kizuna Across Cultures. We were talking about holidays. And one of my students wrote in Japanese, I went trick-or-treating at Papa John's house. And that required quite a bit of explanation that they really struggled with. I'm like, oh, I should have prepared them better to explain this, because first of all, who is Papa John? Might need to explain that. Some of you right now might be going, who's Papa John? The pizza guy. He lives in Louisville. He has a giant mansion. Sometimes he lets kids trick-or-treat at his house. So explain who Papa John is, explain what trick-or-treating is, being able to explain all those things. So if you had a Japanese person in a restaurant, you might need to explain certain foods. You might need to know what foods won't need an explanation. You do not need to explain to a Japanese person what a hamburger is. You don't need to do that. And you might have to explain tipping. Okay. Going to a restaurant in Japan, I hope that this is a scenario that most of them have the opportunity to do someday. Either going on a trip with me, going on a trip with family, or maybe as an exchange student, or maybe living in Japan in the future. And then I thought about ordering takeout or delivery in Japan. I'm like, is this something that my students are likely to have to face? And I was thinking, if they're traveling with me or with their family, the answer is no. If they go to Japan as an exchange student, again, the answer is no, because they're either going to have a university cafeteria or be living with a host family. And maybe someday, if they're living in Japan on their own as adults, they will have to master that skill, but that's a someday thing. So I'm like, I'm not gonna deal with that in my unit right now. So limiting it to hosting Japanese friends at a restaurant and going to a restaurant in Japan. So now we're gonna have a little bit of audience interaction time. We have a Padlet set up to walk you all through some of this backwards design process. And if you're able to, I'd like you to open up the Padlet right now. We have a URL for you, tinyurl.com/backdesign21. And we're going to be Put it in the chat?
In the chat, yep.
Yeah. And we're going to be looking at the first column, which is like, what unit or theme am I tackling here? And what are the real world scenarios that I need to prepare my students for? And I am going to have to exit out a full screen to share the Padlet with you all. So this is, oops. Okay, sorry, I'm not super used to doing this on Zoom because my district was a Google, here we go, exit full screen. Okay, and now I have this Zoom thing on top, which is preventing me from clicking to open a new tab. What if I did this?
Can you click the link directly from the presentation?
Yes, I can.
There you go.
Thank you, Grant.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, finding a right train section. Yeah. And oh, an excellent question. Authentic situations for preschool grade 2 students. Well, I think like as preschool grade 2 students, they wouldn't be going to a restaurant, but it's still things like, someday they're going to have to do this thing. So maybe think of it in terms of someday, like going to a birthday party, inviting a friend out, making a pizza. I don't know what things really little kids would be excited about.
So Elena, do you want to remind them what to do in the first column?
Oh, yes. Okay. So Padlet, and this is something that I had to teach myself when I first started with Padlet. So in Padlet, when you open up to post, you will see that there is, actually I can demonstrate. There's a title and you can put in like your title, and then you can also write a body. So if you want to separate out the title and the body of your post, you can do that, although you don't have to. All right, exploring. Ooh, exploring a new, I love watching this in real time. Exploring a new city. Yes, perfect. Perfect. Yes, all right. So you're going to be asking for directions. I make my kids do that. Asking for information, asking for directions. Yes. Oh, yes. All right. So this Padlet is still going to be here for you guys to return to anytime, even after the webinar is finished. So you can go through and look at what other teachers have posted, maybe get some good ideas, maybe steal some good ideas. And right now I'm actually going to return to the slideshow. Okay. The present thing is also covered. What's the keyboard shortcut? Anybody know? I do file. Slides home. Okay, well, I can move this thing. Yay. All right. Teacher of the year, everyone. Okay. So I have these big real world scenarios, and now I'm going to break this down into learning targets. So one thing that I know is going to be a learning target is I can make plans to go out to eat. And I highlighted that in green because that's something that my students will have done before at this point in another unit. So this will be a good thing to review and also to like spiral in that old content so that we're constantly practicing and reinforcing it. I can find and read restaurant reviews in Japanese, take them to Tabelog, which is like the Japanese website that's like Yelp, and have them like navigate around finding restaurant by location, type, keyword. I can make a reservation online or over the phone. I can understand seating, ordering, and tipping customs in different types of Japanese restaurants, and that's very important because there are different types of Japanese restaurants. Some of them might have, the menu posted on a wall, you just come in and seat yourself, or some of them are like, you have to wait for the host to seat you, and customs can be very different depending on what type of restaurant you're at. I can read a menu in Japanese, very important to know vocabulary for basic things you might be looking at in a menu. I can use Japanese to speak to the host and the wait staff. I can explain American food or customs in Japanese if the need should arise. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in on one of my learning targets, which is I can use Japanese to speak to the host and the wait staff. So here are some of the skills that I know my students are going to need. They need to be able to like state your party, and they need to say they have a reservation and they don't have a reservation. Now I highlighted in red, state your party, and also highlighted around counter words, because for me, this is going to be a grammar thing that I have to teach them, because Japanese, and Grant can attest, also Chinese and some other languages have these fun things called counters. So when you say, for example, I'll have 2 hamburgers versus I'll have 2 cups of coffee versus I'll have 2 bottles of beer. Okay, the word two is different for all 3 of those things. So counter words, and also people, like there are 3 people in our party, there are 2 people in our party. That's also a counter word. So they need to know counter words for people and things that they would order off a menu. They have to say, if they have a reservation, they have to know how to order in the type of restaurant where there's no wait staff. And I don't mean the type of restaurant where there's like touchscreen ordering, although that is very much a thing in Japan, but the type of restaurant where you walk in, it's just a counter. It's just a counter and the menu's on the wall, and you shout your order to whoever's working behind the counter. And that is something that as an American, that's something that was really hard for me to get used to, that etiquette part of it. And then different methods of splitting the check. So in Japanese, there's 2 different ways you might split the check with a large party. One is called warikon, which means everyone in the party pays an equal amount, regardless of whether you're the person who ordered 5 really expensive drinks or not. And then there's betsu betsu, which is everyone pays for what they order. So they need to know that those 2 options exist and are common. They need to know how to ask for or say they're going to do one or the other, or know what they're signing up for if somebody in their party says, oh, we're doing warikon. Okay, so now if y'all are able to go back to that Padlet, we're going to be looking at columns 2 and 3 now. So what do you want your students to be able to do? So returning to your real world scenarios and thinking about, like, use that scenario as the framework, what actual skills the students need to be able to do that. You can brainstorm some learning targets and then pick 2 or 3 learning targets, or maybe just 1 like I did if it's sort of a big learning target, like using Japanese in a restaurant is a big learning target, and start listing out like what are the skills, the knowledge skills, grammar skills, vocabulary skills that the students are going to need. And for those of you who have experience being like maybe a non-native speaker, think about like, what are the specific instances where I know I ran into trouble? Or if you've had experience, like living in another culture, like what are some obstacles I anticipate that I need to prepare my students to overcome? All right, so let's go back to that. Yeah, that worked. Oh dear. Oh, here we go. Ooh, we already have some great responses. All right. Creation of menu, introducing a new friend. I love that. Being able to say their name, age, hometown, interesting facts. Right, geography, knowing keywords. Ooh, knowing currency. That's a big one. Yeah. Inviting a friend. Negative question grammar. Very important. Yep.
Elena, if I may, I would add with knowing currency, like when you get to the country, do you know what expensive is considered in
yes
versus, or in China, especially with a different currency?
Yeah. Oh, that can be a good thing too. Like what is overpriced? What is suspiciously cheap? Maybe asking them to evaluate some of that. All right. Cultural norms for introduction. I like that, handshaking, etc. Appropriate and inappropriate about eating, sharing, leaving. Ooh. Asking for recommendations. Knowing how to ask questions for buying a souvenir. Oh, these are really good. Okay, so I could spend a lot of time here and I will definitely go back and look at this later, but we are gonna jump back to the slides again. Badoop. Ooh, huh, am I full screen now or not? This is interesting. I'm just gonna keep going.
That's okay, yeah, you're fine.
There we go. All right, so now we are going to make some assessments. Now that we have our learning targets, the question is, how are we going to know if our students can do that? Okay, so again, I'm zooming in on using Japanese to speak to the host and staff, and I'm thinking, well, I want this to be an interpersonal task. When I'm asking myself, can my students actually do this? It's got to be an interpersonal task. And part of this task will be them reading and ordering off a Japanese menu. That's going to be part of the task. So now I have to decide my platform. I have to decide parameters. Am I going to tell the students like what their party size is? Am I going to give them a budget? I'm going to write the script for like my part. I'm going to be the host and the wait staff. That's me. And I'm going to record my side of the conversation. Pre-COVID time, I would have just not done that. I would have done it in the classroom, calling students up while the rest of the class is working on something else. But post-COVID times, I have learned record it and put it on an app like Extempore, so that if a student is like absent on the day we do it in class or whatever, they can still do it asynchronously. They can do it at home. And I need to prepare what menu I want to use as part of this assessment. So I have to like go through my authentic menus and pick out which one I want to use for the assessment. So I know that my students are going to have to memorize counter words, polite speech phrases, menu vocabulary and kanji. They're going to have to memorize yen values, maybe. Identify what they want on the menu, recognize the menu style and which method of ordering is appropriate for the venue, and use correct polite language and counter words when speaking to the staff. So Grant is going to show you what that looks like on the Extempore app. And I'm going to stop my share and hand it over to Grant.
Thank you, Elena. Yeah, so we've got a lot of really good examples so far, and Elena has been kind enough to make some assessments, and I can show you guys what these look like directly on Extempore from the teacher's side. Can we all see? Good? Yeah. Okay, so here is Elena's class. She's got her Japanese 2 class ready. She's got 3 lovely assessments for her students today with being at a restaurant. And today we're just going to focus on the Japanese 2 restaurant, Aisatsu. Is that right?
No, the title is Tabe ni Iko.
Tabe ni Iko. How did I mess that up? Oh, the next one is Aisatsu. Tabe ni Iko. Right. Tabe ni Iko. We're going to look at that at a restaurant, having the conversation. She has her title. She has assessment timeline, when it's open, when it closes. You can modify this however you want. Assessment type, you can have group responses. Here we have individual. Students will respond. What will they use? They can give a video response, they can give audio, and they can give text. Here we'll do audio. She has a lovely detailed description. You and your 2 friends are going out to eat at Ankake Taro, a restaurant that serves Japan's famous style anke noodles, Ankake style noodles. Yeah. In the following prompts, respond to the host and waiter of Ankake Taro. So the students know what they have to do. They know the real world task. When can they see their grades? When they're grading. Randomized questions, we're not going to do that here, but for other types of prompts, you can. Since this is a logical conversation, we want it to go from start to finish in a smooth way. Numeric score allows Elena to add a rubric should she choose. And then finally, limitations. This is where you can take a formative assessment and you can turn it into a summative assessment by adding timers. How much time do you want students to have to review? Say 20 seconds, 30 seconds. How much time do you want them to have to respond? 20 seconds, 30 seconds. And are they allowed to re-record their responses or not? I'm going to say yes here because this is just a formative assessment for now. But like I mentioned, you can turn this off and they only get 1 shot to record and it becomes a summative assessment just like that. So with that, this is Aisatsu, right?
Yeah, Aisatsu.
Okay, right. With that, we now have some questions. Elena's created a couple of questions already. I can click into this one and see the question. This is, again, the teacher's perspective. So she's got her text. You enter Ankake Taro with 2 of your friends. Listen to the host greeting and respond with appropriate Japanese.
Irashaimase. Name-sama desu ka?
Ooh. So she's got her audio file. She added that on her own with the audio button. You can add a video of herself, or she can upload an MP3, a video, an image, anything that she wants to sort of spice up the question and add extra resources. We will see what the student side of that looks like very shortly. But yeah, so that's creating assessments on Extempore. And Elena, I will hand it back to you. You can keep going.
All right. Okay, so now we're going to jump back to our Padlet really quickly. And once again, that's tinyurl.com/backdesign21. All right, and let's return to thinking of our learning targets from our last activity. How will students demonstrate that to you? Like, allow them to show you mastery of one of the skill sets that you brainstormed, and then think, what steps will you need to complete to create this assessment? And if you'd like, or if you're from the type of district where your administrators are always harping on you to do certain skills in the Bloom's taxonomy, what skills on the Bloom's taxonomy period will this assessment demand of your students? Now we know depending on what skill you're assessing, that could be something like, for an interpretive, just, interpret, respond. For, well, hold on a second, interpersonal, I meant interpersonal. For an interpretive, it might actually be much lower, or it might be much higher if you're asking them to really respond in a deeper way to something. And then for the skills like, for example, explaining something to Japanese friends, then you might get into the top level Bloom's taxonomy where you're asking students to like create something, like create a presentation that explains American restaurant customs or tipping customs, or, for your Japanese friends or something like that. So that's something to be thinking about to make sure when you're all done with your learning targets and your assessments, like, do I have a variety of different type of tasks in this unit? And keep in mind, we are language teachers. So, the create part of that might only come up once in the entire unit because we really, really are trying to get them to memorize things. Like, that's part of language teaching, and it's okay. It's okay. That's why the bottom of the Bloom's pyramid is the biggest. All right, so I'm going to jump over to the Padlet and see what we've got while I was spieling. I apologize, it's taking a minute to load. Ooh, I like that, describing in an email. Creating rubrics, introducing an actual friend, greeting the vendor, buying a souvenir. Ooh. Ooh. For example, understanding they don't make change for bigger bills. I like that. Working in like the cultural knowledge, right? Inviting a friend, reading a menu, answering questions about the menu. Yep. That was actually one of the tasks that I created on Extempore was exactly that, where I gave them a menu and asked them just some basic interpretive, like, do you understand information about this menu? And that's the type of task where on Extempore you might want to randomize the responses because it's not like an order, like a conversation. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to the slides now. And now that I know what my assessment is going to be for the task of speaking to the host and waiter at a restaurant, now I'm going to plan some activities to prepare students for that task, for that assessment. So here we go. Here's where I need to figure out, like, what exactly do I need to teach them to prepare them for this assessment? So I need the vocabulary part of that, which I put in green just to help me organize my thoughts. So phrases and expressions used by staff, phrases and expressions used by customers, materials. Can I find a recording of going to a restaurant in Japan? That took me a long time to find, but I actually did. Activities. So I want to show them, like, I know I want to show my students a video of like a person going to a restaurant in Japan and do a short observe, compare, contrast activity. I need to prepare practice scenarios, practice conversations, and then to teach counter words. I like to do videos, songs, and a chart for students to refer back to. And this is a screenshot from one of the videos I found that is specifically designed to teach kids how to use counter words in Japanese. So ippai ni hai jusu ga sanbai. Right, so that you know how to count cups of stuff. Okay, so for an example of how I might use this in the classroom, all right, so I actually have all of this stuff I threw in a Google Drive if you want to look at it. I found this video channel on YouTube by this person named Akane, and she literally just videotapes herself doing everyday things in Japan. And these videos are specifically for language learners. So it's really great and really authentic. And I found this video of her. She like goes to this cute little cafe and orders brunch. That's it. That's the entire video. So I'm going to show that, have the students do a little observe, compare, contrast. Like, what do you notice? What's different? What's the same? What questions do you have? What about this is appealing to you in English? And they're answering these questions in English. And then, so that's like our introduction to this task. And then I give them my handout with vocabulary that they might use at a restaurant. It's massive, it's huge. I'm going to break it up into different sections and we're going to practice after each section. Another thing I do in my classroom whenever I give them new vocabulary is I always like, we go through it together and I pronounce it and they repeat it. And that's very old school, but I think it's really, really important for them, especially I know my students at this point, and some of them go all the way through to the end of Japanese 2 with never learning their hiragana or katakana. And they just sit there listening to me say and listening to their classmates repeat and frantically writing down pronunciation notes. And some of them are going to have to do that, and they know that's the drill by now. I see Grant nodding. Is it the same in Chinese?
Yes,
Yeah.
a lot of just constantly reading characters out loud and making sure.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a big fan of making them read out loud. Yeah. And then, so after we practice little sections of that, like talking to the host, getting a seat, asking for a non-smoking section, then I'm going to give students a little script to follow, and they're going to have, they can do a little role play. And then if they feel confident, they might perform their ordering role play in front of the class. And I know my students and know the pace we work at, and this is not a one-day lesson plan. This is not a one-day lesson plan. This is multiple days. So again, if you want to see like the materials I prepped, I just threw them there, tinyurl.com/backward samples. All right, so now let's look at how we can play with that on Extempore. So again, I'm going to hand the screen over to Grant.
Oh, it's so heavy. No. Yeah, so Elena, thank you so much for giving those great examples. Now we can see what that looks like from the student side of things directly on Extempore. So when I'm in the Extempore student portal, this is the student side of things. You can see student.extemporeapp.com. I'm in my Japanese 2 class, and I see my 3 assessments waiting for me, like we saw earlier on Elena's teacher account. Tabe ni iko is the one we are going to choose right now, being at a Japanese restaurant. I click into it, and I can see that description that Elena had written earlier, all of the details that I need that gets me in the mood as a student to say, okay, I'm ready to complete this task. So because for the sake of time, I'm going to jump into one that has an image prompt in it with a menu. And now I can see, oh, I have a menu here, and I can complete the task. I can order what I want in Japanese. Of course, I'm not going to be ordering. Elena is. But we can see the question, record yourself telling the waiter what you want and order for yourself and 2 friends in Japanese. And she has a little more description. So I can open up the menu, and as soon as I'm ready, Elena can speak. I'll hit record, and she says, little countdown.
Biru o 2本をください. I didn't respond to the whole prompt, but we'll say that's okay. I ordered 2 beers.
Right. Okay. Oh, Elena, feeling good. She got 2 beers.
I got 2 beers. I didn't respond to the actual prompt.
Anyways, you can see how it works. I have the menu here. The student can look at it. They can respond. They can use it. It's a direct, authentic resource that they can use. And then they can record themselves. If they're not feeling too good and say, oh, maybe I mispronounced something. Maybe I'm not too confident about that. They can re-record it and do it again. They can play their response back. There we go. As many times as they want. And once they're satisfied, they say, okay, I did a good job with that. They can submit their attempts, and then they can continue with the rest of the prompts. Now, obviously, we mentioned we're going to do this in order. For the sake of time, we did the image prompt. But now you can see that submitted one goes over here, and it will be available to view as soon as the instructor gives feedback on it. So that's Extempore from the student side and a very quick little demo. And now I'll toss it back to Elena, and she can wrap things up for us.
Mm-hmm. All right. So to summarize, the process that we went through today is we're going to start with a real world scenario, for example, going to a restaurant. From that, we figure out what our learning targets are. And then we break down our learning target into the necessary vocabulary, grammar, and cultural skills that our students need. And then we create an assessment. Now, something I forgot to mention on the previous slide is once we've created this assessment, now creating materials and activities, a lot of that work has actually been done already once we create the assessment. Because for example, when I was doing the restaurant unit, when I created my assessments, like I know what the interaction is going to be. Now I know exactly what vocabulary and grammar I need to teach my students. I already have a menu that I know I'm going to use for one of the practice rounds. And so it's like everything that was in that little lesson activity, it's like, here's an authentic text. Here's the words we need. We practice it several times, throw in some different menus for variety. Now we have this framework, and sort of like the hard part is done before you actually sit down and start planning like your day-to-day lesson plans. And from there, you have a lot of material already. You don't need to like spend hours and hours searching for a whole lot of other stuff. So we create our materials and activities to prepare students to do awesome on the assessment and demonstrate that they have mastered these real world skills. All right, Grant.
Yes. So as we wrap up, we have a lot of questions already coming in, but I just want to have a brief little reflection on our learning, what we have talked about so far today. So in the chat or in the Padlet, if you can find a good place for it, let us know what adjustments do you think you could make to your current lessons using the backwards design framework? And you don't have to answer all three. You can do a combination of both. You can, or all three. You can choose one of them. However you want. We want to hear from you. What materials might you be able to reuse when you create them using backwards design? Obviously, as teachers, we love reusing materials and using things over and over. That's our best friend. We don't want to spend too much time constantly creating new things. And then finally, in terms of both content and language, how does backward design better help your students understand the learning process, right? When we tell them, hey, here's where we want to be, here's what we need to do to get there, how does that help our students? So please, we invite you to put something in the chat, tell us your thoughts, what do you think? Just reflect a little bit on what we've talked about so far today. And we will, what am I trying to say? And then we'll wrap up with a bit of a Q&A and we can share our thoughts.
Yep, awesome.
Yeah,
All right, so I am gonna click to the next slide. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, so in conclusion, we hope that this webinar has been useful to you today, even if you're already super experienced using backwards design. We hope that has given you some cool and fun ideas that you can use to like reinvigorate how you approach your lesson plans. And we want to thank you all for spending the afternoon with us, even though we're not done quite yet. Anyway, these slides are going to be available on the Sketch platform, so you can check out some of our works cited.
They are there right now.
Yeah, they're there. They're already there. Sorry, they're already there.
And then I can I'll wrap this up. So we at Extempore have a whole bunch of things on backwards design ready for you already. We have a blog on the backwards design on using Extempore for backwards design, just how Elena demonstrated it today. We have a grab and go task page, which I will put the link to that in the description, or in the description, I'm sorry, in the chat. And what that allows you to do is allows you to take tasks directly from Extempore and put them into your Extempore account. And those are designed with backwards design in mind. Now, those are usually the sort of end goal, that final task, but they're excellent to use in your classes. And then finally, we have a growing Airtable, which is our importable assessments page, where it's even more of these similar tasks that you can use and put them directly into your Extempore account. All sorts of sort of customizable filters and everything for that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
all right, should we open it up for the Q&A?
I will just say a great big thank you to both Central States and Elena for being here. It's been really fun putting this together, and it was a really just good time. And then thank you to all of the attendees here today. It means a lot that you took time out of your day to learn with us and talk about being a language teacher. Elena, final thoughts?
Yeah, I also had a lot of fun preparing this webinar, and also like I really did go through and I am re-wrangling my entire restaurant unit. So you guys saw my process on display here today. And you know, I'm really excited about the unit I created, and I'm really happy that I had the opportunity to share my backwards design process with all of you.
Awesome. And so with that, please hang around if you want. You are welcome to ask us questions. I will get us caught up. Elena, I don't know if you've been able to see the chat. We got a whole lot.
I have not, but I'm going to open it now.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I will just, I will answer a few questions. There was a lot about Extempore, and then we can answer some. Integration with Blackboard and Google Classroom. Google Classroom is going to be here in like a few weeks. We are almost done with Google Classroom, but we do integrate with Blackboard as well. The group tasks with Extempore on iPads right now, not yet, but also that's something in the future. But yeah, you can do them on a desktop. So Elena, do you want me to direct the questions to you? Do you want to answer them directly, or?
Sure, if there are any that you think I can answer directly.
I think, let's see. So Carla says backward design is really going to help the teacher stay focused on the goal and make sure the activities are relevant. I think we would agree with that. Mm-hmm. Students also know what they're working towards. Someone says, Martha Nyoko says, I worry that this is teaching to the test. How is this approach/framework different? Elena?
My answer to that is, in a sense, it is teaching to the test, but the test is a real world task. So it's not like, how do I put this without saying something that I have to be very careful about what I say about major companies that produce tests. It's the nicest thing I will say, for example, about the AP test is that the AP test, like the Japanese AP test is the only one I can speak to, actually does have these types of real world scenarios. And when I prepare my students for the AP Japanese test, I am preparing them for things that like they actually have to do if they ever go to Japan or interact with a Japanese person. And sometimes it's stuff that if you approach it not from backwards design, you end up missing out on in your instruction, and it sort of comes back to bite you. Like I remember the very first year that I taught AP Japanese, and one of like the practice conversations that was on the AP test was like, if somebody said like, oh, I won my tennis match. And the student had to respond to that. And my students were like, you know, that's the type of thing that happens every day in real life, but my students were so stymied by it, like they didn't ask a question, so I don't know what to say. And that's when I was like, well, I need to reevaluate how I'm approaching this, you know? So I start with, what are my real world scenarios? What are the actual social interactions they would have with real human beings? And from there, I'm like, what do we need to be able to talk about? What are my learning targets? And then the assessment becomes that real world scenario where students can demonstrate that they can do something in real life. And yes, you are preparing them to pass the assessment, but the assessment is not a test for test's sake. It's a test that asks them to demonstrate that they can do something real with the language.
I will just real quick, we have another question posed. I will just reiterate that, Elena. I think the term teaching to the test has sort of carried a really negative connotation with it throughout the years. But like, I think it's just about how we look at it now, right? The test is totally different, and it's not the typical test that we give. It's a task. It's something real world that they're doing. And so with that said, it's very different from a typical test. And when we can prepare them for that, well then, hey, if that's considered teaching to the test, then, you know, I'm okay with it. Elena, a question from Callie Rump from Delaware. Since you mentioned grammar as part of what students will need to know, but also we are encouraging proficiency, how do you approach grammar in your activities to meet the goal?
That's an excellent question. So if I can go, actually, let's see if I can go back to the slide where I showed you, like, for example, in the restaurant unit, my big grammar part is the counter words. Like they need to know counter words. And there's a certain amount of just straight up memorization involved in that. It's like, here are the counter words. Okay. So we started with like the idea of counter words has been introduced to them before. They talked about it when they had to introduce their family members. Like I have 2 sisters, or I have 2 dogs. And the word for 2 is different when you're talking about sisters or dogs. So it's not a foreign concept to them, but you know, it's introduced to them in the video. So hopefully during the video warm up, that will come up in one of their questions or observations. If not, I will point it out that Akane like orders using counter words. And then we have this little video, it's 2 videos actually, where we sing along and learn the counter words. And then I'm like, here's a chart for you, a chart that you can refer back to. Now, in terms of them using the counter words, it's always in context of the real world task. So for example, on the extempore demonstration that Grant showed you, the question that he showed you, the one that I was a bad student and I borked deliberately to show you a typical student response, is you have to order for yourself and 2 friends. So automatically, this person is going to be the student has to order food and drinks. So in order to complete the task, they have to know the appropriate counter words to use for that. And to be fair, if I were giving feedback to myself as a student, I would say, you did a good job using the correct counter words for a bottle of something, because I did correctly say I want 2 beers, using the right word for like 2 bottles. But you also need to order your food, Elena, so please try again.
Elena, we have another question from Carla Swick, and maybe I'll take this one.
Okay.
Elena Sensei, how would your use of extempore change between virtual teaching and face-to-face learning? Would you like me to take a stab first? I don't mind, as the expert.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so Carla, what I would say, we get this question a lot. As a teacher who uses it in my classes, one of the things that I really like about using Extempore, even in a face-to-face environment, is the extra practice it can give students when they're outside of the classroom, right? Even if it's something they do for 2, 3, 5 minutes every single day, that's something I like having my students do before they come to class. They can preview something, they can review something we did the day before, they can do it right on their phone. So that's really, really easy for them. Whereas virtual teaching, of course, if you're in fully online, it's an excellent assessment tool. And it keeps all of your content and information, incident responses, and your grading all in one place for absolutely everything. So that's something I really like about it. And it can be used in many similar ways, regardless of if you're virtual or face-to-face. Elena, would you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd like to add, this year I was fortunately able to transition back to face-to-face teaching at the end of the school year. And I kept a lot of my assessments and activities online, even though we were doing them in the classroom. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, one huge advantage to that is that if students are absent, and I had students absent like all the time, if students are absent for whatever reason, you don't have to make up, like, for example, an interpersonal task with them face-to-face. You can just say, go on Extempore and do it. Like if you're absent, you can still do it.
Yeah, that's one of the really handy things that we have, is that, constantly able to help students, be able to do things online. Real quick, before we keep answering questions, I have 2 things I want to add. This webinar, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. This webinar that we've done with Central States is part of a much larger PD series called the Extempore PD Extravaganza 2021. I put a little link in the chat. Many of you maybe have seen that. There are dozens of other presentations that we'll be giving throughout the next few weeks on how to use Extempore. I have one coming up with DECFL next week, and really excited for that. And even some multi-day workshops where we'll be looking at more specific topics like real-world tasks, and even one is on student anxiety as well. Please be sure to check that out. And now the second thing is evading thing. Oh, yes. This webinar is recorded. If you're still here, it will be on YouTube by tonight. If you would like to rewatch it, if there's something you missed, it will be there for you. Another question, Elena, do you ever assess vocabulary and or grammar in isolation before a summative real world task that they are integrated in?
I will say that I assess vocabulary in isolation in form of kanji quizzes. I still give kanji quizzes. I have found that they are very valuable in that if I don't give them, the students will not learn or memorize the kanji. So it's a way to hold them accountable for that. I don't do vocabulary quizzes other than kanji quizzes. And I should clarify, kanji are the Chinese characters used in Japanese. I also, like in Japanese 1, I give students a hiragana and a katakana test. And again, that's, like characters in isolation, and they have to pass that to be able to pass the class. I'm hardcore about that. I'm like, you got to pass this or you're not passing Japanese 1.
Yes, Elena, if I may add, as someone who teaches Chinese and who also obviously has a bunch of needs for vocabulary, I give vocabulary quizzes too. I don't know if they count as typical quizzes. I normally just give maybe 5 or 6 sentences, and they're all fill in the blank, right? And I'll have maybe 4 or 5 blanks with important words that we're looking at and we're using every single day. And I know it takes them 3 minutes to do it, right? If I give them a little half sheet of paper and I say, okay, here's a little fill in the blank, they do it. If they fill them in and they get them all right, I know we can move on, right? Yeah. If they're getting 2 out of 5, 1 out of 5 on it, and that's my formative assessment, right? That tells me, hey, well, we are not there yet.
Yeah.
I'm all for little things like that. It's just as we mentioned, we don't want the purpose of our class to be about, okay, you have to learn vocabulary. But at the same time, as teachers, we need those little checks to know where our students are.
We do. And remember, you're always quizzing them on stuff that they're using. Mm-hmm. It's always stuff that they're using. So it's like, here's a quiz for, like menu related kanji, but it's like, you need this to be able to read a menu in Japanese. So the students always understand that there's a purpose to what they're memorizing and learning.
Jennifer, I just mentioned this will be on YouTube tonight. We will tweet a link to it, or Extempore will tweet a link to it by tonight, like I said. Marie Petrina Poli says the quiz can be a writing quiz. For example, what are 3 things you ordered for lunch? Tell me what you eat for breakfast. What is a healthy snack? Sure, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
They can write what they want. It will show what they know, and they will be successful. Yeah, entirely.
If you ever have them do like little journal entries or short little writing prompts in the target language, those are super, super fun, super, super useful. so that you can quickly assess like where they are in terms of their proficiency or ability to use vocabulary related to whatever unit we're doing.
Any other questions? Celeste asked, do you send out certificates of attendance? But I'm not too sure what she means by that.
Oh, for if you need to prove to your administrators that you did this for professional development or continuing education or whatever they call it.
We can, I believe we can. Yeah, I can. Yeah, I can send an email to the, I can send, I thought she was referring to the students for some reason. I don't know. I don't know why. Yeah, I think we can send those to Zoom participants. Yeah. I have not seen a link to the Japanese. Oh, Elena, yes. Linda has a question. Can you link? Okay, got it, Celeste. Thank you. Let me write that.
Let me, I see the link to the Akane videos.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, like I'm going to go into, okay. I'm afraid you're all going to see my massive list of bookmarks here. All right, which one was it? Oh, I already downloaded it, so I took it off of my bookmarks. Here's what I'm going to do. We're going to watch this. We're going to go to Google Drive, a million tabs open. I'm going to search for it using the title. That's what I'm going to do.
Fine. That's fine.
Yep. Okay. Nihongo Kaiwa Cafe Bohemian. So now, all right. You know what? I'm going to stop screen sharing now because I don't want you all to see my YouTube history.
That's
what I'm
fine.
going to do.
You can also, Elena, you can also hit pause at the top.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, that's fine. That's fine. That's
but
fine.
now I'm going to go and I'm going to post a link in the chats.
That is fine. That is fine. And yeah, and everything with what am I trying to say here? Everything that Elena is posting, I will put all of these in for all of this details, these links, the presentations. It will all be back on Sketch where you can find it. In Extempore, record audio while the students are playing the audio and thinking about a shadowing test. I want both the main audio and the responses. Elena, I believe I know exactly what you're talking about, like a simulated conversation. Yeah, it can do that.
Sorry.
It can do that. So you can record an audio, have some pauses in between, and then you make sure in the directions you tell your students, hey, play the audio first, and then it'll play the audio, they can hear the question, and then they respond, and the next question plays, and they respond. So just like that, and you can do a simulated conversation.
Yeah, I will add, it's exactly like the type of simulated conversation that they have to do on the AP test. So if you do the option to like add the timer to it, which is also what they have to do on the AP test. Now you have like a perfect way to have them practice the types of conversations they have to do on the AP test.
So Marie asked, what is schedule? It's like schedule without the last three letters. It is where all of the information is posted for this larger PD series. I will post the link again, and you can find all of the presentations that we have for the next few weeks, including this very first one with Elena.
And I did post the link to Akane's YouTube channel in the chat. And she has a bunch of really good restaurant videos. So like I downloaded the Cafe Bohemian one, and then she goes to a food court and goes to one of those rolled up ice cream places. Like if you've ever seen those, like they're a thing in America now. And she goes to a izakaya, and she goes to different types of restaurants. She also does other stuff, like she goes to a 100 shop, she goes to a laundromat, she does all this stuff. I also, I use a Firefox extension to download the videos I like, which is against YouTube's terms of service. So you didn't hear me saying that I do that. But I'm very big on when I find something on YouTube that I really like, I download it and I keep it because it might not be there in 3 to 5 years.
Oh. Carla says she doesn't see it. I think she put the link. You should be able to.
Yeah, there are a couple people post here. I can just post it again. A couple people posted questions and comments, which we're really happy about. I don't want to like discourage that or anything.
Oh, so, you only sent it to panelists.
Oh, I did. Okay, so hold on. That's why.
Oh no.
That's why. All right, I want all panelists and attendees. Yes. Let's try this again.
There we go.
I am technology.
Arigato.
Yeah, I'm so glad I found it because it took me so long to find like what I was looking for. Because unsurprisingly, you know, most people wouldn't think to videotape themselves doing normal everyday things, especially not for the purposes of maybe other people trying to learn the language. It's not something I would ever think to do.
So it's always so great when you find that one YouTube channel. You're like,
That
oh,
one YouTube channel that has exactly what you're looking for.
yeah, exactly. Other questions before we wrap up? We have hit our time. Man, Elena, talk about perfect timing. It is 4:15, an hour on the dot.
Yes, I'm happy about it. I'm really happy that you guys came out today. I'm really excited to go back and look through the Padlet and look at your all's ideas. And thank you all for asking really good questions too.
These are really good questions. Okay, I am gonna stop the recording right now and we can say farewell.